Most analytical failures do not begin with a dramatic error. They begin quietly, often in ways that seem reasonable at the time, and they usually surface much later than expected, when timelines are tighter and tolerance for uncertainty is low. Failures rarely start where they appear. And this story is a perfect example of how a problem can grow silently until it threatens to derail an entire project. This example is fully identified, but it reflects a pattern I have seen more than once in real development programs. Different molecules, different teams, but a very similar failure mode playing out over time. It's a classic case of what works perfectly well at one stage of a project becoming a hidden liability in the next. Let's walk through how this happened and what we can learn from it. The issue first appeared during routine analytical testing. It wasn't a sudden, catastrophic failure. Instead, the results began to drift gradually. Nothing failed outright. All the specifications were still being met, but the trend was moving in an uncomfortable direction that raised a quiet, nagging concern among the team. It was the kind of slow-moving problem that's all too easy to ignore. Naturally, the first reaction was to question execution. Was it the analyst's technique? Was the instrument performing correctly? What about sample handling and preparation? All of these were reasonable places to look for a problem, and the team diligently reviewed every single one of them. They went through the standard troubleshooting checklist, but everything seemed to be in order, which only deepened the mystery. So why wasn't the problem obvious? Well, for one, the method had worked before. The historical data looked perfectly acceptable, with no major red flags. No single result ever triggered an out-of-specification event that would force an immediate, formal investigation. There was no obvious failure signal pointing to a clear cause. This made the emerging problem very easy to dismiss or rationalize away as just random noise or a temporary fluke. But the real issue wasn't analyst error or a faulty instrument. It was method fragility. The analytical method itself, which had been acceptable and reliable earlier in the program, was simply no longer robust enough for the stage the project had now reached. Its foundation was shakier than anyone realized, and the increasing demands of late-stage development were starting to expose the cracks. This fragility showed up in subtle but significant ways. Small, previously insignificant changes in laboratory conditions, like temperature or reagent lots, now had a measurable impact on the results. Minor variations that used to be absorbed by the method now amplified the noise in the data, making it harder to distinguish a real signal. Assumptions that once held true about the method's performance were no longer reliable. The method was behaving differently under the stress of late-stage demands. The root cause of this fragility traced all the way back to decisions made much earlier in the project. The method had been developed at a time when speed mattered more than absolute robustness. Quick and good enough was the goal. And while that was a reasonable trade-off at the time, those initial method choices were never fully revisited or challenged as the program matured. What was once a smart shortcut had quietly become a significant liability. The turning point in this story came when the team fundamentally shifted its perspective. They stopped asking, "Who made a mistake?" and instead started asking, "What assumptions do we have that might no longer hold true?" This simple change in language and focus transformed the investigation from a defensive, blame-seeking exercise into a constructive, forward-looking, problem-solving session. It opened the door to finding the real solution. The fix, when it came, was not cosmetic. It wasn't about retraining an analyst or tweaking a minor setting. The method was reevaluated from end to end. The team went back to basics to identify the truly critical parameters that governed its performance. They systematically tested the method's sensitivity to key conditions to understand its breaking points. Finally, they tightened the controls only where they actually mattered for performance and reliability, instead of adding unnecessary complexity. Just as important is what the team did not do. They didn't chase every single anomalous data point in an endless game of whack-a-mole. They resisted the urge to overcorrect the method by adding dozens of new, restrictive steps. And crucially, they did not rewrite history to make the early development decisions appear flawed or incompetent. The focus stayed squarely on fixing the system for the future, not assigning blame for the past. And the outcome, after the changes were implemented, the results immediately stabilized. The worrisome upward trend flattened out completely. Most importantly, confidence in the data returned, both within the team and among stakeholders. Batch release resumed smoothly, and the program was able to move forward without any more analytical disruptions, getting everything back on track. The real lesson here wasn't purely technical. It was temporal. The failure was a function of time. Decisions that were perfectly reasonable and appropriate earlier in the project were no longer suitable for a later stage. The problem was not what was done, but when it was last reconsidered. An analytical method isn't a static tool. It's a living system that must evolve with the program it supports. So, what's the leadership takeaway? Strong analytical leadership continuously retests assumptions, especially at key program transition points. What worked in early discovery or research may not be robust enough for late-stage development and commercialization. Recognizing that simple fact early is the key to preventing these kinds of silent, creeping failures from ever taking root in the first place. In the next and final video of this series, I'll step back and summarize the core principles that tie all of these episodes together. We'll look at what effective analytical development really looks like across the entire product lifecycle and explore why good judgment matters just as much as good data. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.